Thank you everyone for being here today. The title of our webinar today is Role-Playing Games, How Fantasy Can Build Reality for Neurodivergent Communities. A short visual description. Oh, sorry. My name is Bailey Patterson. I work for the Human Development Institute, and a short visual description of myself is I am an early career white woman with red hair, and I'm wearing a checkered blazer. So about this webinar, RPG developers, game masters, and players with various relationships to neurodivergence will discuss the world of RPGs and explore the real-life benefits of this style of gaming for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Join Merge to learn how RPGs have the power to shape culture collectively, as well as build relationships, skills, and more fulfilling lives individually. If you have any questions, your questions and comments can be sent to me at bailey.patterson@uky.edu. And then finally, for housekeeping, the content shared in this webinar are the views and opinions of the presenters and do not necessarily reflect those of the Administration for Community Living or the University of Kentucky. Okay, I believe that is all for housekeeping. And so today's topic is the very exciting topic of RPGs and how those can be utilized by neurodivergent people, people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and all other types of neurodivergent community members. So just to get everyone on the same page, we want to share a short presentation about what RPGs are, so everyone can kind of be working with the same information as we get started. All right, so what are RPGs? RPG, that stands for role-playing game, and this means that players pretend to be characters in a given world and go on adventures. You might also hear TTRPG, that stands for tabletop role-playing game. In this type of game, players collaborate with each other to tell stories with their characters. In the past, people would gather in person and play these games around tables, hence the name. You might think of Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder. But with modern technology, people can play these games remotely online, so they're not necessarily around a tabletop anymore. What is character creation like? Character creation is an important part of RPGs, and players can create their own characters. They can design physical characteristics, personality traits, abilities like magic or combat. There are many methods for character creation. Usually, there will be a rule that players have to spread out what their characters are good at, so there's some sort of difficulty or challenge. Players can make characters that are like themselves or totally opposite. It's all up to imagination. What does a DM or GM do? A DM, Dungeon Master, or GM, Game Master, works to create and guide the story that players go through. They set the scene by describing the setting, other characters, and the action. They can act out the roles of NPCs, that stands for non-player characters, or the characters in a world that are not played by a person or a player in the game. They can act as a sort of referee and make sure the story is enjoyable and that it keeps moving. So, what is it like to play an RPG? Gameplay varies based on the game. In a more standard TTRPG or tabletop role-playing game, the game master will describe the world and the action going on around the players and set up an adventure. Then the players will take turns describing and acting out what their character would do. They can explore their surroundings, talk to other characters, and use their abilities. Game masters can work to make the game immersive by using pictures, sounds, smells, or items that exist in the world. This helps players feel more in tune with the game and makes the experience fun. So, what makes playing RPGs fun? RPGs are fun because you can pretend to be in a fantasy world going on adventures with your friends. You can be anyone that you want to be and solve problems as a group in a fun and immersive setting. So now that we all have kind of a shared common understanding of what we're going to be talking about today, I would like for our panelists to introduce themselves. Um, Kim, could you go first? You're the first on my screen.
Yes. Hi. Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. My name is Kim Brown. I am a clinical counselor from Vancouver, Canada. And yeah, from the my bio that I sent in, I did my master's thesis on how D&D can be used as a therapeutic tool. So I'm very happy to be here. Thanks so much.
Thank you, James Mendez.
Hey, what's good? I'm James Mendez Hodes. You can call me Mendez. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a cultural consultant and an analog game designer. I work in video games, music, literature, board and card games, and especially tabletop role-playing games and LARPs. That's live action role-playing games. That's where you get up and you put on costumes and act it out. Um, a cultural consultant, if you haven't heard of that, helps other creatives represent diverse and especially marginalized identities in an authentic and uplifting way. This is a fancy way of saying people hire me to tell them that they're racist um, or ableist, more to the topic of today's webinar. So, representations of disability and neurodivergence come up a lot in my work, both in the stuff that I'm creating as a designer and especially in the way that I'm giving feedback on other people's work and representations of disabled people in stuff they make.
Thank you, Jazz.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jazz, he, him pronouns. I currently work as the trans health coordinator at Kentucky Health Justice Network. I'm also a disability justice advocate and a terminal DM. I like to run all kinds of games. Right now, I'm really wanting to run a Vampire the Masquerade game or a Thirsty Swords Lesbians game. If you're in Kentucky, hit me up. But I'm really excited to talk about this mechanic because as an autistic person and as a person who has like complex PTSD and a litany of other diagnoses, the way that disability gets portrayed and gets to be role played and told in stories is really important to me. So I'm really excited to be talking with everybody on the panel today.
Thank you, and Glenn.
Yes, I am Glenn Jennings, and I am a member of the communications team at HDI. So if you see a, excuse me, sorry, I have a bit of a cough right now. If you see an article on our website, there's decent odds that I wrote it. I am also someone who's been involved in disability and autism advocacy for a long time, and am also someone who's trying to start a game in Kentucky. Hey, if you're interested in Daggerheart, hit me up.
Thank you. And to go ahead and just jump into the panel, our first question is, what is the relationship between RPGs and the neurodivergent community?
So neurodivergent people gravitate towards any niche or nerdy hobby that normalizes or rewards special interests. What's more, RPGs structure social interactions both in and out of character in clear ways that facilitate practicing and learning social skills in a safe and fun environment where there are clear but not life-threatening stakes.
Mhm.
Um, I think like there's probably neurotypical people who play RPGs, um, but yeah, I mean there have to be. They're just when I think of like conventions I've been to, and I'm like, okay, who was neurotypical at the last convention I was at? I can't I can't think of anyone.
I don't think you're wrong. I think it's a medium that is so inherently imaginative and playful and outside of the box. And also something that like you really kind of like you really have to be into it to love it. And as neurotypicals, we can be maybe a little or neurodivergent people, I mean, we could be, a little specific, a little intense about our hobbies and our interests in the stories that we tell. I personally don't know very many neurotypical people that play, but the ones that do are theater kids, so they might as
Oh
well
yeah. Hmm.
be in community with us. So
And that's also something that I kind of talk about a lot with the when I talk about why I'm interested in RPGs. I've been in a lot of autistic spaces for a long, long, long time. And one of the things that you hear people say a lot is that they get really frustrated because there's no rule manual for social interactions and how you're supposed to talk to people and make friends. Well, in a tabletop RPG, there is. It tells you exactly what to expect, exactly what your role is in this interaction, and exactly what you are supposed to do. And I have like three of them right next to me. So it's a really good way to sort of build up relationships in an environment that feels safe and planned, and then just how do you make friends? You go to the same places with same people and do the same things over and over and over again. It just naturally sort of leads you into a relationship.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, as someone who very recently thought they were a neurotypical person and has been diagnosed otherwise, yay. I think, yeah, kind of what everyone's touching on is TTRPGs offer, particularly, I think the draw for the neurodivergent community is that there's a lack of ambiguity. So the rules have a very clear outline. Even in the social scripts, there's a very clear way to begin conversations. You're not trying to grasp at how to you're not, I mean, walking up, how's the weather, like at least in a game, a gamified sense. If you're on a quest, you know that you can walk into a tavern or walk into a nightclub or whatever the setting of the game is, and can say, we're trying to save the princess, we're trying to figure out who the murderer is, or discover uncover a mystery. And so there's almost like a built-in script on how to practice those social skills rather than just kind of wading aimlessly in the ocean of social interactions.
I think there's also an element where a good tabletop RPG rewards you for getting invested in it in a lot of ways. Like, I am not a Pathfinder or D&D 3.5 player. Frankly, the D&D 3.5 players frighten me to a certain degree. But like if you look at D&D 3.5, it's probably one of the most complex rule systems of it's probably one of the most complex rule systems of mainstream fame. But like there's people who absolutely love it because they understand it really, really well and can they play it like chess. They can look at a combat encounter 3 levels from now and know what they need to do to build towards that and what steps they take. But even me, who like prefers rules light narrative systems, like I start thinking, I want to run a sort of Star Wars inspired space opera fantasy game in Daggerheart. And then 3 days later, I'm researching black holes at 1 a.m. in the morning and time dilation. There is a degree to which you kind of get rewarded for going down rabbit holes, no matter what angle you approach it from.
Thank you all. Moving forward, can you all talk about what playing RPGs teaches you?
So I think sort of in line with what Glenn was just saying, right, is that it is often a gateway to other skills, right? So if you're playing in a fantasy world and you may find an interest in blacksmithing or even just doing historical research or even art. Like there are so many people, creative people in the TTRPG communities that maybe want to try start drawing their characters. So I think in addition to social skill building and the problem solving, being able to set goals and work towards goals and achieve goals. Yeah, I think it does offer a sense of being able to try different skills in a way of, is this something that actually interests me or not? Yeah.
I know for me personally, like being a DM specifically taught me and really prepared me for my current work and organizing and like movement work. Getting getting 7 people to meet up at the same time every week and organize and schedule that is so challenging. It is the death of most campaigns, right? So like being able to not just organize that, but also I am managing, as a DM, I typically play with 5 or 6 players. I am managing 5 or 6 storylines, different people's wants, goals, how they oppose each other and interact so that we can all have a good time and tell a story together. And I find that that work has been very, very useful in my organizing work around like reproductive justice and disability justice. So, but also I did learn how to do chainmail jewelry because I want to make stuff for the Ren Fair. So, love the artists.
Scheduling, as always, is the real villain. Uh, for me, I think that there's a couple of things that really come to mind for me, which is from an angle as a player and as a GM, I think that there's a lot of healthy introspection that being involved in the RPG community can teach you to do. I feel like there's a lot of sort of ways that you can, through these games, gain insight into yourself, gain insight into what themes you keep coming back to, things like that. But I also feel like there is sort of, as someone who likes to try out a lot of different systems, I feel like there's a sort of way of recognizing, you know, what tools work well for what. Like, at the beginning, I was trying to learn D&D fifth edition because that's the most popular RPG. That's where most people start. And I quickly learned that I wasn't very interested in the typical sort of Tolkien-inspired elves and dwarves fantasy worlds. And uh, I wanted to play in different genres. I wanted to play in different types of settings. Why does this have to be medieval European? Why can't we be in space? Why can't we be in the Old West? Why can't this be, Seattle 1985? And I learned that hacking 5e can do some of that, but it doesn't do a lot of it. So one of the things I learned was how to balance different systems, how to look at what is this trying to do? What kind of experience is this trying to give you? What kind of what kind of interest do you have? And how do you meet this game on its own terms?
All right, if that's all the responses, I'll go ahead and move on to the next question. Let's talk about playing RPGs and building confidence. How does building confidence impact the mental health of players?
Uh, I mean, I can jump in. I think at least from a neurodivergent lens, one of the things that um, is worth highlighting is that, neurodivergent people are often masking for survival. So trying to take play, like to exist in our world every single day, whereas in a TTRPG setting, you get to mask because you choose to, because you're pretending to be a character. And so I think there's an element to that um, that shows that masking doesn't necessarily have to drain the battery, or it's an option that you can choose when and maybe when you don't mask. Additionally, I mean, just being around other people with shared interests. I know for myself, back in the day, I used to carry all of my RPG stuff in my backpack, and there was five, maybe six of us in my high school that liked role-playing games. You would never have found a D&D t-shirt when I was in high school. 26 years ago. Uh, um, and um, and so yeah, I think it builds, there's a sense of community, getting to practice an array of skills, um, and socialize. To me, like that built confidence, getting lots of positive feedback too from other people, whether it was um, people cheering you on when you're rolling like rolling a natural 20 in a D&D game. There's really nothing better like having, a whole group of people cheer. Um, yeah.
I will say for me personally, it really helped like build like confidence with social anxiety. Um, Especially when you're DMing, you kind of have to like get over the idea that you're gonna do like an embarrassing voice or something is probably not gonna work or you're not gonna remember that rule. Working through that and like handling conflict, they're just really great skills. And like when I play D&D with like kids and whatnot, it's really, really fun to like watch them kind of learn and practice with that in real time. And I really hope that there's like more initiatives to have more like autistic kids play with D&D because I think that there's just so many skills that you learn. And as you learn those skills, you gain confidence. And I think that it's just such a like safe environment to do that as opposed to like where a lot of people might feel unsafe to practice those things or to stand out in like a school.
I'm in particular a player who likes to be a little bit messy in the way that I run my characters and run my games. I like things to be a little bit chaotic. I like things to be a little bit unpredictable. And like when I found players who sort of matched that vibe and felt like I was in an environment of people who were like, yeah, we get what you're going for and we agree with it and we also want that and we are going to work towards that too. There's like this sense of camaraderie and community that you get where you can just be like, oh, I am not wrong for the way I am. And it's kind of similar to the feeling that I used to get in my theater days when I would be on stage for a show and then get this feeling that, there is a shared vision among all of us of, we're doing Romeo and Juliet. We have this shared goal of putting on a good performance of Romeo and Juliet. This is, a beautiful play. We have a particular way we're looking at it, and here are the actions we are taking to do this. And we all have our individual parts to play, and each of those parts are unique, and each of them are important. The show cannot exist if one of those parts goes away. So it's like you are individually important to this whole thing, but you are not the whole thing in yourself. And it's sort of that feeling of an almost humble pride in a way that you are a part of something amazing, but you are not the whole of it. And your job is to work with a bunch of other people to make that something amazing a reality.
Um, I think so. One of the confidence issues that comes up most often in RPGs happens to new players, either people just coming into the hobby or people who are joining a new group or meeting a new social environment. Very often, an established social group, and it could be that group is four people, who've been playing an RPG together for a long time, have developed a social rapport and a set of shared experiences and expectations that can make it really, really intimidating for a new player to feel comfortable and acculturate to that social situation. Um, this problem doesn't necessarily live on the border between neurotypes, but any kind of difference in demographics or experiences between an established group and a new player can exacerbate this tendency. So I think it's important for people who are entrenched in the community um, to to spend a lot of time thinking about how they can make new players feel welcome and like reach out of their comfort zone to make contact with someone who's doing the same thing. Try not to like overwhelm them with new information or punish them for not knowing things that they wouldn't have a reason to know.
Thank you. So I wanted to talk a little bit about representation. If you guys could respond to how is neurodivergence and even disability more broadly represented historically in RPGs, and then how is that changing?
I brought my
So
Sorry, go ahead.
yeah. So historically, representation of pretty much any kind of marginalized community, disabled people included in role-playing games, was bad. Really, really, really bad. Um, Neurodivergence is a particularly interesting one to study because a lot of role-playing games made disability and insanity into punishments that were regularly visited upon players. So, for example, if the works of H.P. Lovecraft, he wrote Eldritch horror about Cthulhu and stuff, are the foundation of a huge genre of RPGs that also go into like Eldritch horror themes. And historically, in those, you would have these sanity points that represented how neurotypical, I guess, you were. And then as you encountered like traumatic supernatural events, you would lose those sanity points and then fall victim to like caricatured versions of various kinds of mental illness. Um, this isn't unrelate like this is related to things that happen in the real world. This is related to people's responses to like traumatic experience and like certain ways that PTSD is developed, but this game wasn't trying to represent PTSD in a sympathetic educational way. It was trying to use it as like a borderline comedic punishment, at least an exaggerated punishment. um uh, this was common in a lot of different games. You would get derangements if you lost humanity by being a vampire for too long, this kind of thing. Um, uh, and then in a lot of games that focus on like physical adventure, like fantasy adventure in fighting dragons and that kind of thing, um, disabled people either got like completely erased, like they just weren't able to participate at all because no one could imagine like putting a wheelchair in a dungeon. Um, or again, disability became like only a punishment. It was a bad thing that happened to you, and um, either they would heal it by magic so that disabled people functionally didn't exist in the world, or if you were disabled, you just didn't get to be on screen at all.
Mhm. Yeah, there is a reason I specifically brought my Call of Cthulhu rulebook out there because Call of Cthulhu is probably one of the most famous examples of this. And I have the insanity rules right up here now, where basically the way that Call of Cthulhu works is that it's a horror game, so it's supposed to be, you are encountering both mundane and supernatural terrors beyond mortal knowledge and beyond what mortals should know. And when you encounter such a horror, be it, someone has died in a particularly gruesome way, or you have seen some sort of supernatural occurrence, you usually make a sanity roll. And if you fail that, there's a few other steps in between. There's a lot of uh, Call of Cthulhu can be a little bit clunky with how it handles this, but the things that could happen to you is something called a bout of madness, one of the possible options, which includes stuff like amnesia, psychosomatic disability, violence, paranoia. Um, you have a significant person whom you mistake someone else for. You have physical hysterics or an emotional outburst. You gain a phobia. You gain a mania. And it's like, and this is still in the current edition of Call of Cthulhu. Um, I also should have brought my copy of the Savage Worlds rulebook where they have flaws that your character can take, and some of those flaws are just straight up disabilities. Um, and so it's like there's a lot where it's treated as something to be avoided and something that should be, something that you do not want your character to have. And in Call of Cthulhu in particular, once again, if you lose all of your sanity points, your character is essentially out of the game. You cannot play them anymore. They are considered too mentally damaged to continue the adventure. And Call of Cthulhu is a game where you're probably going to go through a lot of characters. It's designed so that your characters can die really, really, really easily. But, it's kind of one of those things still where it's like after a certain point, there is no healing, there is no coming back from it. And it doesn't really look at that as something to be interested in engaging with on a narrative level. It looks at it as a fail condition.
I'll say some of the stuff on like how it's changed over time and like modern stuff. I will say that like current trends that I'm noticing on this are focusing on either having like cultural competency around this issue, like actually looking into how certain things work. Like I think of cyberpsychosis and cyberpunk being based off of like a steroid rage, or you're playing with concepts of like stress, right? Like, if your character is under stress, you are going to have certain things that, happen to you if we're role playing real life. For me, I think a lot of the stuff when I think about the history and where we're coming and where we're going with this, I feel like a lot of it is being really interesting when we think about disability as theme for story, like whether or not you're doing like a Vampire the Masquerade where that those types of things can be tied to humanity, or like in cyberpsychosis, the more metal and stuff that you put in your body, the less human you become. And what does that mean to be less human, and why are those traits similar to like mania and that kind of stuff? I think that it's really important to think about why we tell the stories that we do and what is the inclusion for, and like specifically like whether or not like it's actually fun to play.
Mhm.
Because I think that like I enjoy like there are a lot of aspects about being autistic that I very much enjoy, that are positives that aren't just like net negatives so that I can like put more points into another stat that I want.
I also feel like there's an interesting thing to be said about how the community's perspective on disability in games have changed. Because, like, I have seen in real time the evolution from, you know, 30 comment Reddit thread because you mentioned that one of your players wants to play a blind warrior to there are actively rules in the Daggerheart rulebook, which is a fairly new RPG that just came out last year, I think, um, that are actively like, here are rules for how combat wheelchairs work. Here is how they function. Here is what you should consider in game with them. So it's like there has been this kind of slow but still meteoric change in the culture around how disability is viewed and treated within the community itself and how various members of the community react to it.
Thank you. And sorry to the panelists, just so you all know, I'm going to be going out of order on the next few questions. I'd like to make sure we get to some of the most important questions before we switch over to the Q&A portion. So my next question is, what are some of the ways that you can set up an RPG from overall experience to specific gameplay to make it more accessible and impactful for the experience of neurodivergent players?
Um, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of, I've been noticing some of the stuff about in the chat too. People have been popping up about like game stores being overstimulating. I think there just needs to be an awareness and sort of touching on even just the previous question. I think things are changing, the more that people that experience mental health or people with neurodivergency exist in exist in the world where people are creating games and running games. I think that makes the biggest difference. Um, and so I think the more people that are neurodivergent running games, or the more people that have struggled with mental health or have mental health, uh, take up space and GM or write systems or become consultants or all of those things, I think that's how the change gets implemented, right? Um, but yeah, I mean, I think for creating safe space, I mean, I was just at a convention this weekend. I was at Terminal City Tabletop Convention, which is in Vancouver, and I ran a bunch of games. And one of my co-DMs, like she had fidget toys on her table, which I thought were great. We even just talked about having a place where people could charge their phones so they weren't distracted by like needing to, like, oh, my phone only has 10%. But I mean, I think just being mindful and even having conversations with your players. I do think as a DM or GM or storyteller, because there's a million different ways of calling them, the person who sort of runs the game, is making sure you have a session zero. Session zeros are essentially a game where a session where you have either I like having one-on-one conversations with players too, because I feel like sometimes people don't necessarily feel comfortable talking about certain things in a group. But talking about, hey, this is the story that I would, this is some of the themes I'd like to touch on in the story. Are you comfortable with this? Is there anything that's completely off the table? Is there any accommodations that you need that I can support you in? And I think that kind of goes back to Mendez's comment around. I totally lost my train of thought. You made a comment earlier that, anyways, it doesn't matter. But yeah, I think just making sure
Trauma.
that you
Yeah.
are you are able to have those conversations with your player about what would make them feel more included, comfortable, and safe at a table. Like, safety is a huge thing, particularly when you're playing games like Vampire the Masquerade, where it's, or even Cyberpunk. There's usually like lots of violence. I mean, in Vampire the Masquerade, it's called the World of Darkness. Highlight the word darkness. And even in D&D, I'm running a Curse of Strahd campaign, which is in a very dark, sort of Dracula-esque setting. So, yeah, a session zero, all the time, forever.
If I could add one quick thing, for the neurodivergent folks, there are, I will say that especially like when I'm trying to like rope kids into playing it, one of the biggest intimidating things are these rule books that are massive, and extremely ex cost like prohibitive for a lot of folks. So many plain language guides exist for so many of the popular TTRPGs that break down the rules into like one simple sheet. The vast majority of the people that play at my table never have read a rule book. They never will read a rule book. I can't convince them to. I try very hard to send them videos. It doesn't work. Players want one sheet of rules to reference. Those exist. It is not as intimidating as it might seem. And then even as a DM, I don't necessarily read all of every rule book either. So, it is not too I promise that the learning curve isn't too hard to get into.
And
I,
to what
I've I've literally never read the Dungeon Master's Manual, and I've been playing D&D since I was 9 years old. I have no interest in it. Like, I mean, and the other thing too is like a DM's responsibility to really lean into what your players want from a game. I'm a very rule of cool style of DM. So if someone's like, well, this is something I'd like to try, I'd be like, okay, let's do it. Tell me how we're going to do this. But yes, Jazz, I think that's a great point, is that there are so many like cheat sheets or like Cole's Notes versions that you can find in games. And even YouTube, like YouTube is such a huge thing too. You can watch a video, so you can listen to a video about how to play a game while you're, washing your dishes or, chilling in bed or whatever. I think those are really helpful too.
I find videos to be the easiest way to learn. And I also like having, like, for my games that I run, one of the things I really like to do Um, both so both for my own sake and to have an easy resource for players is like, okay, so how do you do a thing in this game? What are the steps involved in it? So I'll like make a bullet point guide for this is how you make a basic roll. If someone wants to do this, these are the dice you roll. This is what you add to it. These are where those numbers come from. And I find that that's really helpful to me to sort of strip it down to its barest essentials, understand what the basics of the game are, and work with it from that angle. Um, and also, I think that having a good environment matters a lot. Like, it is something where I've seen some talk in the chat about how they find their friendly local game store inaccessible. Yeah, I have a friendly local game store near me that I work with a lot, and I kind of to asked them to help me out because they're all lit by fluorescent lights, and fluorescent lights are my personal demon that I will fist fight. Um, so I've asked them, for the Daggerheart game I'm planning on running there, if that actually happens, can y'all please put a filter over this thing so that I don't have to come in with my rose tinted glasses every time to reduce the glare, and I can sit there for, 2 to 4 hours without getting a headache. I think that there is also a lot of systems that are, sorry about that, built with reducing cognitive load on the GM in mind, but like, I think that it's helpful to have the players have a hand on things both in game and out of game. If you're playing, if you're playing D&D, maybe the GM doesn't have to be the one to keep track of the turn order. If you're playing, maybe another player can give a recap over what happened last session. Things like that. Having other players share in the work of it so that it's not just the GM doing everything.
You. And before we transition into the Q&A, I would just like if each presenter, if they will, could just sum up one final thought about what you want the wider community to know about RPGs and their potential.
I think there's two things that I have in mind for people who are interested in getting into RPGs and people who are, just curious about it in general. One, we are not scary. We are all theater nerds. Um, we are hanging out and having a good time, and we are practicing storytelling together. That's more than what's happening than anything. And for people who are interested in RPGs and want to get in on it, I think it's really valuable to know what you want and explore the space. A lot of people start with D&D, but like D&D is not a system I like very much because D&D is very focused on combat, and that's not something I'm very interested in. I like systems that are, less granular with it and a bit more chaotic with it. And I like systems that focus more on other stuff that happens. Know what you want out of a game, understand what you're looking for, and look into systems that'll give you something like that, especially if you find D&D intimidating because it has a relatively high number of rules. Um, there are a lot of systems that are much less complicated out there that might serve you better.
I will say that I think that I really appreciate, like I've said earlier, I'll just reiterate that I really appreciate the way that like we as a community are having conversations about why we tell stories, how we tell stories, and who we tell those stories with and about. And I think that it's really important to understand that this space is an extremely like collaborative, open and accepting space. It has the potential to be so much more, and I feel like it's heading in that direction with how big it's getting and just how many different stories are getting to be told and highlighted. And I think that if you're, curious about it, or you're in this call and you serve youth and you want to like build programs around it, I'm very hard pressed to find a list of skills that like a kid's not going to develop while engaging in this activity. And I think that it is something that's really, really cool and beneficial, and that we should be putting maybe just a little bit of funding behind. I don't know, as we think about that as nonprofits and government entities. So.
I was just gonna say from like the therapeutic lens, at least from in either engagement or a DM is the D&D community or game TTRPG community has grown pretty astronomically since when I was a very nerdy teenager. And I think the best piece of advice after co-signing everything you said, Jazz, which was just incredible, is like don't be afraid to take a risk and fail. Part of the game is trying things out and maybe pushing yourself very slightly. I mean, even just a little tiny bit out of your comfort zone. And if you have a really great group of players or a DM around you, they will cheer your successes. They will cry with you. I've had lots of sessions where people have cried from, varying events, right? And I'm a very strong believer that failure is an opportunity to grow, and I think TTRPGs really create a space where we can try that. And so, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so to move on to the Q&A, I've noticed there's a repeated question about resources, so I thought we might be able to get that out of the way first. I noticed, Mendez, you might have flagged that you wanted to answer that. If you would go ahead, if you don't care.
Yeah, I actually I had a follow-up question. When you and just I guess put the answer in chat or something like that. When you ask for resources, can you be a little more specific about what kinds of resources, like recommendations of rule books or videos about the topic, or something about like specifically integrating them into a therapy context?
A lot of the questions Mendez has been answering in the question and answer, and you may see them over there. And we'll go back to the ones that haven't gotten answered yet. Uh, and this one is from Amy. It says, I am working with a team to use RPGs to help teach people with intellectual disabilities different skills through a more immersive experience. Any tips and tricks and how to make this self-sustaining and both uh, accessibility and but filled with variety, accessible and filled with variety and excitement. And this is for people with significant disabilities or non-traditional communicators.
I would love to chime in to answer this one. So I think that one of the things that would be really good is to stick to maybe more of like a one-shot format. So there are a lot of different systems that are relatively simple, that maybe like, oh gosh, like kids on bikes, right? Like where there's just a couple different stats that you would roll, very easy dice rolling system. The rules fit on one page, and you can treat it kind of like another RPG, or a literary term you can call it Monster of the Week. It's essentially you have just a simple quest that you guys do every time you meet up. It's a different simple quest. They could be the same reoccurring characters that just go on these different quests, or you can try out different systems to see like which ones your players play. There are so many different ones to try, I will say, but they're like you'll find something that will work with your population for sure.
There are a ton of like free one-page RPGs out there too that are often very interesting and very cool and are designed to give you a lot of variety without complex rules. And I can also give a shout out to Jazz. You mentioned Monster of the Week. One of my favorite RPG systems of all time is called Monster of the Week, and it's a relatively simple and straightforward system that gives you a very clear goal, but can give you a lot of variety in how you approach it. Um, I have run that system so many times and done so many weird things with it, but it's a lot of fun if you know what you're doing. And I can also give a shout out to Tim Beach's system called Start Here, from Beach House Games. He was one of the original designers on, I believe, D&D Second Edition, and created a system, and that Start Here, that is specifically designed for new RPG players to give them a similar experience to D&D, but with much less complex rules. So that's something that's worth looking into if you want to do something that feels like D&D but doesn't have as many complexities to it. And that's relatively freeform that you can do a lot of stuff with.
Yeah, just to chime in with that too, like Dungeon World is a really great system. You're basically rolling 2d6, so it even limits the amount of like additional materials that you need because it was mentioned earlier that games can be quite expensive, especially as someone who just came from a con and bought a new a new rule system book. Um, so like I love one. You can find tons and tons of one sheet RPGs. Honey Heist is another really fun one. There's one where you can play basically witches familiars going on little adventures together. So you can try, I would recommend, I agree with Jazz, like trying one shots and maybe trying a bunch of different lasers and feelings. Yes, lasers and feelings rules. Um, and yeah, just trying a bunch of different stuff and seeing what sticks. Because not every system's going to mesh with everybody. Not everybody loves 3-year campaigns, and that also puts a lot of pressure on a DM. And the worst thing that can happen is that a campaign doesn't finish. Yes, the witch is dead. That is correct. Thank you, Johnny. But yeah, like, yeah.
Thank you all.
I just want to say, like, I'm still not totally sure what the like resources request was focused on, but I sent a couple of possible answers in the Q&A. I linked to Geek Therapeutics, who are a group that extensively uses RPGs in like in active therapy. Also to the scholarly work of Janaea Kemper, who is a game designer who has done a lot of really interesting study into like some of the psychology of RPGs. There's a link to Leaving Mundania, which is a book by Lizzie Stark about the community of LARP. That's like a good introduction. And I'm also going to post like my vote for like if someone wants to play their first ever RPG and I'm not sure what they're going to be into. I send them this game, Lady Blackbird. Um, it's by it's by John Harper. It's like 7 pages and it runs itself. Um, yeah. I hope some of those are relevant to the resources question.
Yeah, and just to add to, if you're someone who maybe is a little intimidated by the idea of joining a group, there are some systems that allow you to essentially play and DM on your own. Um, and so I know we talked about, I know Call of Cthulhu definitely can do that, despite some of their other, issues. But there are definitely systems, almost kind of like doing the choose your own adventure style books, but in an RPG setting. So it could give you a chance to just get familiar with the idea of thinking about what would my character do, or what would my character say, or trying different settings. So I wish I had resources for that, but
Who Like a Crow is a really good uh, solo RPG. Um, that's one that I think is really cool.
It looks like we have one question that we haven't touched on in the question and answer. It's the one we've had to ask a couple times. And Jazz, I didn't know if you wanted to pick it up or someone else. I couldn't tell if you had started answering. It's the one that I work in leadership with state government. I provide guidance to staff statewide in response to the significant placement crisis for children in foster care. Many of these children have significant trauma history and are neurodivergent. How can I assist in educating caregivers and social workers who do not understand, respect the importance of the attachment some of our kiddos with neurodivergence have to RPGs? And then they disclose that they're neurodivergent female who spent a large portion of her life engaged in ARPGs, and she gets it, but how to help others.
I like all things in state government. I apply it to metrics that we can measure. There's a lot of different skills, like I talked about earlier, and I'm sure Kim could also touch on when it comes to people and especially when it comes to trauma and crisis that kids can learn that are really, really great. I also think that it's really important to foster positive activities with kids. And I think that this is a really positive activity with kids. I think that you can, because there's so many different systems, you don't have to frame it in the violence of killing goblins and slaying demons and stuff. There are so many different kinds of TTRPGs that it could be as simple as like they just get together and they run a coffee shop. Like, and that sounds riveting. So like there's a lot of different ways that you can like kind of, I would say, get rid of some of the criticisms that people have with it and attach it to things that the government understands, like metrics.
You might also point out that the government plays RPGs all the time. Like they love doing like the disaster preparation LARPs. Like those are RPGs.
I can also point out that there are a few RPGs that are like specifically designed to teach kids good problem-solving skills and non-violent problem-solving skills. One I know of is called Venture Society, which I think is designed mostly for younger kids, but it's by Ninth Level Games. It was created specifically by a pair of therapists and designed around the idea of like teaching kids to collaborate and teaching them to, how do you solve a problem without violence?
I think there's I mean I definitely agree with Jazz is like I think I work with high risk youth in Vancouver out here, and there's definitely a lot of other things that they could be getting into, and so I think fostering positive and skill building hobbies is great. I also like, I think I could even, depending on the person that you're talk to, I would even strip it really bare bone and being like, well, what did you like as a kid? Because you liked operation, you liked books, you liked riding your bike. This is the same thing. It's just a way for a kid to cope with day to day. And who wouldn't want to go into a fantasy world and be a hero, particularly when they faced an enormous amount of challenges. Um, yeah,
And how is that different from, picking up Lord of the Rings and
yeah,
picturing it in your mind?
yeah, a thousand percent. Who didn't think of wanting to? I mean, at least those of us who love those books, who didn't want to be, Samwise Genji and Frodo, growing up. And so now they have an opportunity to do that and create their own character and learn all of these skills. And even skills beyond. I mean, like D&D taught me, I created websites and like forums, and it taught me about like graphic design. Like you learned so many skills from those types of things. And so like um why I don't know. I just really struggle to understand why someone would be anti that, really.
I have a character in one of my games who is a bassist. I have broken out my own bass guitar to like write some music because of that.
All right. Thank you all so much. Thank you everyone for being here, and thank you especially to our wonderful, incredibly knowledgeable panelists for sharing their time with us today. There's been so much great discussion. Um, and as a reminder to everyone, if you wouldn't mind, there is a link in the chat to complete an evaluation form about your experience at the webinar today. I would really appreciate it if everyone would complete that. And yeah, just thank you all so much for being here today. I so much appreciate it.
Can I
Thank
I just
you.
can I just add thank you so much. I just want to add like I think the conversation in the chat, people were explaining things to each other and making suggestions. That really shows what this community is like and how this community can support each other. So I just wanted to add that. So thanks everyone else for being so supportive and offering suggestions and all of your questions. And yeah, just thank you.